Welcome back to the Built on Air podcast. We are in episode 4 of season 16. Good to be with you all. We've got a full house today. Camille and Ali, as always, welcome. And Jen Rudd back with us again. Welcome back, Jen.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you back, as always. We'll see what Jen's up to in a bit. But let's walk through what we're going to be talking about today. The Built on Air podcast is an hour-long show. We'll be walking you through. We start with our Around the Bases, keep you up to date with everything going on in all the Airtable communities. Then a shout out to Onto Air Backups, our primary sponsor. And then Jen will be walking through how to build proposals automatically in using different tools to do that. And then Camille is going to go through some of the updates to interfaces and in particular in the detail pages, some of the new changes that they've made, how those work. Then a quick shout out to join our community at BuiltOnAir. And then finally, I'll wrap up with array slice focus on the new array slice formula function that's available. So around the bases. Few announcements from Airtable. The first one is they want feedback. This is good to hear. Maddie is the community manager at Airtable and is asking for ways to improve the community. So please share your feedback. There's definitely room for improvement. We've gone through many discussions on that front. So hopefully they will listen and we'll make some improvements to the community.
I see Scott has already begun.
Yep. And Kavan as well. Mm-hmm. We'll see where it goes. Most of it is private. There's a link right there to fill out feedback. And so, yeah, please share your feedback to them. I think if they really are listening and want to make changes and improvements and put some more resources behind it, there is a lot of potential there for the community to grow and improve. Next one.
Scott has a list he's already doing.
What's that? You're building the
list?
list?
Scott's list is mostly inclusive of what I would say. So
Yeah. That's our spokesperson. Right, Scott's on watching, so he knows his task. All right. There was one announcement from Micah, Airtable employee, talking about improvements to update to the record details. Is this, Camille, is this where you're talking about these changes? Yeah. Okay. So we will dive into this. And so just high level layout flexibility, more options, on canvas controls, supportive text, helper text, and a few other things. There is still the convert to legacy layout will continue to be available as well. Actually, I did hear from Airtable that they told me that will not go away until you can do everything in the new layout that you can do in the old one. So hopefully that is.
Yeah, I will say I'll get into like some of the details later in the show, but many of the things that I in particular was complaining about were addressed in this update. Some of the things that I want are still not there, but I agree that this is much better than what it used to be. And this, coupled with some of the improvements to the legacy layout, does make it like a really viable layout option. You still might want to use the legacy layout. It really depends on what you're trying to put on the screen, but there are now some considerable positives to using the newer layouts. Again, some stuff is still missing.
Yep. And there's some good feedback here. Several, Drew with some good feedback. Very good. Yeah, so we'll dive into that. Here's just kind of the Meredith posted similar in how she's using the new stuff. So good conversation in the BuiltOnAir community about these changes. And
I still want to be able to print a gallery layout because it looks like you can print it. You can turn on the settings, like the button's there, but then when you actually push it live, the button disappears to print, which is really annoying.
Oh.
It's like it's there. Just turn it on.
I think because it's paginated, Airtable probably is like, well, how do you want the different pages to print? And they haven't figured that out yet. But they shouldn't show the button anywhere if it's not ready, because it's confusing.
It is. Because I was talking through some with an interface and we were building it and we're like, oh, great, it'll do exactly what we wanted to do. And we publish and no, it didn't.
Yeah.
I'm still so frustrated with the differences between just take the list layout, for example. You can do, if you're doing the legacy layout or the full list page on the interfaces or the list element, dragging it into the old element based layouts, there's 3 different sets of features that appear and don't appear seemingly without rhyme or reason. And it's just can't they all be the same? I'm so frustrated being oh wait, I can't do that unless I put it over on this type of layout, and I can't do that unless it's on this layout. It's I want it to just be consistent.
Yeah. I don't know if we'll ever get that until they get all the new stuff, and that becomes the only way to do it.
I know.
I just want the add record button to work with any instance of the list.
I would agree. Yeah. I really find it useful to have that button at the top to open up a new record form, or even the link to existing record that's also handled by that same button. Very useful, and you can't do it on the element-based layout views. I don't know how to describe, I guess the legacy, before there were detailed pages at all, you had the blank layout where you would drag individual items and record pickers, and it's getting very difficult to describe what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Or when you have more than one action button, the other ones just disappear behind the 3 little dots.
Yeah. I do not like that.
And you can't add on top of that a little note that says click here to open the other buttons. You can't add any helper text to a list layout.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, some stuff is still missing, which I'll get into.
Scott, are you listening?
Yeah. Add it to the list. Here's a couple. Scott, actually, we'll continue with the Scott theme, found a couple issues or nuances with Airtable. This one is in regards to different behaviors of the last modified time. So if you create a new record, it'll automatically set the last modified time, and it'll be the same as the creation time. If you do it through the API, it also behaves that way. If you use the CSV import extension, it will also do that. However, if you import new records into an Airtable by right-clicking on the table name and choosing to import that way, Airtable only records the creation time. It leaves the last modified time completely blank, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't trust, I use last modified time for reference purposes, but I would venture to say maybe 1% of my automations have anything triggered off of the one record updated or when using the last modified time field. I just don't trust it. I try really hard to use when record matches conditions and kind of just trick it into having some sort of, if I can fit it into that window, I do, instead of using last modified time.
I do remember, I didn't notice that it was inconsistent. I remember thinking if I create a record, last modified will be filled in. And then I would flip-flop back and forth between, no, of course it doesn't get filled in. It wasn't modified, it was created. Of course it would be filled in because you are creating is a modification. And I couldn't ever remember which one is true. And it turns out it's because it's inconsistent. So now I don't feel bad.
Yeah.
I've also noticed if you use button actions in Airtable to trigger automations, it doesn't log the person who clicked the button. It logs the automation as the last modified user, which is really annoying too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of a little mean, yeah, if you're doing the last modified time of the entire record, but you could trick it to do, if you have a, if your button is triggering an automation,
Like
then that's different. But if your button triggers a field, which then triggers an automation.
Yeah. So like if you like check this box, then that person check the box by clicking the button. Yeah. It's just annoying.
Yeah.
It is.
Nuance.
That is a good little trick though, because you can set the button to update a field and then set the automation off of that. So
and if you use a checkbox instead of a single select, I often use a single select, but if you use a checkbox, it means you can force your users to only run the automation once, which is sometimes useful.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Lots of little hacks there. Awesome. There's another one Scott brought up in restoring records from the trash. Some unexpected behaviors. If you delete a record, then to restore that record, the record reappears in your base with the original created time and record ID. However, instead of reappearing with the original last modified time, it updates the last modified time to the time of the restoration. Mm-hmm. And so that can potentially cause, because that's going to re-trigger things if you are using, again, why Allie probably avoids that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I get it. I can see why you might change the last modified to when it was restored. Mm-hmm. However, I can see why you wouldn't as well. So I guess it's like, what is the most expected behavior? I'm restoring a record. Give me all the values that it used to be. So don't update the last modified. I think that's probably the expected experience. And so just sort of making that shift might make things less confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just having the fact that sometimes people really care about all the history of a record. Mm-hmm. And so when you're restoring it, obviously users need to be trained not to throw stuff in the trash. But if it is being trashed, what's how do we get that historical behavior and information?
Right. And I like what Scott even detailed in here. It says that there is nothing that shows up in the revision history if you restore the record, even though it's changing the last modified time, it doesn't tell you why. So even if I feel like a happy medium would be, show in the revision history, this record was restored at this time. So that way there's some hint about what happened.
Yep.
Yeah.
Although I do like it that it tells you who threw it away, though. The audit trail is amazing.
Yeah, and it would and it would be nice to show in the history that it was restored.
And deleted.
And So
I try and train people to delete records. Yeah.
Right.
You can turn that feature off, but you do have to do it table by table, which is annoying if you have a lot of tables and a lot of bases to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and here's one more. Scott says, and it triggers a newly created automation. So if you have an automation that triggers on new record,
I try to avoid those as much as possible because you want to make sure it matches the criteria.
Yeah,
I think it would trigger basically everything. When record matches conditions, if it matches a condition at all, when record enters a view and when record is created. So they can help with the record is created because it's being restored. So they could probably eliminate that. But the other two, I don't know if there's a way around that. I think it would, because then it's like, when should Airtable tell you, yes, it has met your conditions, but no, it shouldn't trigger this automation, but it shouldn't be counted as created.
Absolutely. I mean, I try hard to, every time I make an automation, like I said, I always use when record matches conditions, and I have at least 2 steps after that trigger. One is to perform the action, and then the final step is to go back and update that record in some way to say I did perform the action, whether that's adding a timestamp or changing a single select or a status. And then my filters for the conditions are this is true and this is empty. So that way it's not going to trigger more than. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Going to Reddit. Here's a really good thread. Somebody doing some analysis of Notion versus Airtable for a fairly large database, and some pretty good reviews. So this is somebody's pros and cons list of Airtable versus Notion, and they went through it and actually used both to kind of get a feel of how it would be. So they have 10,000 rows and get a pretty good overlay. Sounds like this person's leaning towards Notion, but felt it was sluggish, but they did like the experience better. I'm kind of moving away from Notion personally. Like we still use Notion. And at one point I was very heavy into Notion, but I'm using it less and less.
Notion strikes me as a product that I wouldn't necessarily replace Airtable with, but supplement Airtable with. Like whatever you would use interfaces for, or you would use Page Designer for, I imagine you could do quite well in Notion and have things be editable and connected and all that good stuff and shareable. I do feel like one of the points in this thread is that scrolling through a lot of records in Notion is pretty laggy. Maybe in the future they'll do some performance enhancements, but Airtable is, I think, better for viewing like many records at once. And Notion is better suited for deep dives into a particular record, I think.
Yeah, I would use Notion more like a more complex Google Doc than I would for a database.
I would agree.
Right. Yeah.
Same with Coda.
Yeah, Melanie's in our chat saying, just discovered Coda recently. Wow. So glowing.
Yeah, I just recommended Coda to a client who thought Airtable was too databasey. It was more like a personal management. So I think Coda is a good app for that. But I think Notion is just like a nice Google Doc, personally.
Yeah. And somebody, a Coda employee, actually created a sample database in Coda for people to check out and use to get a feel for large data set.
I'm still not sure what the difference between Notion and Coda is. Like, to me, because I haven't used either with, to build any complete project with, it's a lot like saying Google Docs and Microsoft Word to me, and that like those are pretty similar in terms of products. And I'm sure there's like use cases where one is better than the other, and I just don't know enough about either to ascertain which is which.
Yeah. So I like Coda. Okay, yeah.
Airtable plus Notion.
Okay.
Yeah. Coda I haven't picked up in a long time, but I know when I did, I built a couple of projects in Coda that fell apart because it just did not scale at all. This was years ago. So I've heard they've made many improvements to scalability since then, but like moving the same exact project with the same exact functionality into Airtable, some things were a little more difficult because Coda has a really nice like dot notation for formulas where you don't need to have these lookup fields and all these crazy things. But those also slow you down. But ultimately Airtable scaled. It's still up and running while the Coda projects failed after like a month.
Yeah, it's like as a developer, like all of us that are builders, like it's enticing because you can do so much and mix and match and unstructured data. But sometimes there's value in structure and coming back to like the simplicity of every column is the same data type.
I am now
go through that life cycle.
I'm so biased now towards structured data. I think because I work in such a large company that I want to always say this column is a number. It's a number and it can't be text. I don't care if you want text, use a different column.
Validation.
Right.
Yeah. So that's it's enticing, Notion, but then you just it gets so unwieldy, like you're in this nest of different components, and I feel like Coda is the same. I haven't spent as much time in Coda. So it definitely is enticing that you feel like you can do everything you want, but then it gets too complex.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyways, good discussion there. Moving on to the table forums. This was, we talked about a previous post that was all about checkboxes. And only in these types of communities are you going to get people loving talking about checkboxes. Now we're talking about button fields versus action buttons and the pros and cons. And Kavan gives a good insight there. So what are the pros and cons to button fields versus action buttons? What are they? Who wants to explain the difference?
Well, an action button in an interface can mean a million things now because we have a bunch of different iterations of what those are, depending on what layout you're on. Yeah, it's wild. But they can do many more things in an interface. Whereas, as Kavan mentioned, a button field can only open a URL in an interface. Which can be powerful and can be nice, depending on how you're using it. But in the actual database, you can use the button field to do other things like run scripts, open page designer, stuff like that. But none of those actions are actually available when you're looking at it in an interface. So there's functionality available on both sides, and neither one of them are 100% available when in an interface, which is frustrating.
Yeah. It's you really gotta ask yourself first, what is it that you're trying to do with a button and where are you? And then that's going to determine what one you use, because there's not actually a whole lot of overlap between a button field and a button interface element. Like if you think of, if you use like Softer or, Glide or any other like portal, and you're importing your Airtable data into it, the button field there you can import and it's just going to be a URL. It's the same thing as an interface designer. None of these systems, including Airtable's own interface designer, talks to page designer. It doesn't talk to any of your extensions, really. It just sort of opens URLs. But the interface buttons perform actions. They can directly trigger an automation. They can go to a different page. They can use the URL from your button field and make it into a slightly different looking button with fewer color options. Strange, but you could do that. So if your button is just supposed to open a link, ask yourself what color you want to use. If you want to do everything else, ask yourself what you want that button to do.
Right. And if you need a button for every record, like in a list layout, then you're going to need to use a button field.
Yep.
Because you can only have one action button at the top of the page or wherever. But the button field, yeah, exactly. So it might be nice if you have a button that's like, view website for this company or something like that, and that appears for every single record. That would be when I'd use a button field. Or if you need to link to an interface page in a different base, maybe, or something like that. Otherwise, you can just use the open record details, which is nice. There's a million things to talk about here.
Yeah.
I'm sure Kavan and Scott covered it quite well in this.
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually goes back into Coda, talking about the differences between how Coda.
Coda, huh?
Yeah. Kavan's definitely in the Coda. Bill is a big Coda fan, so there's definitely fans out there. So yeah, if you want to know everything there is to know, here's a really good thread on button fields versus action buttons. All right, last one or one more, also from the table forums community. If this is a nice little hack, if you're wondering, if you're trying to figure out like the size of your attachments inside an attachment field, you could extract that via script, but there's also a way you can do it as an automation. The automation will give you that information. So you see here in the screenshot, you can get the URL, the type of attachment, the thumbnail URL, or the size. And then you could then save that into another field to get the value. But I think this would only, you couldn't loop through all of them if you have more than one attachment. I think this assumes a single attachment. Yeah.
I'm guessing it would probably have a comma separated list of all the sizes. Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, could you do a never mind. That's complicated. I was going to say you could try and do like a repeating group without a script. You could use a script, obviously, but if you did a repeating group and use that size as the list, I wonder if you could like do something weird. Nah.
We might have to do a segment on that. See how that works. Yeah. Anyways, good stuff. If you're looking for attachment size, that's a good way to go. Script would probably be easier for me, but yeah, it's an option there. Okay, last one. This is from X Twitter, from Julian, who's a consultant in the space, and kind of gives a philosophical discussion of what should the focus be. Airtable. What is Airtable famous for? It's famous for its database, less so its interface. There's other products that are maybe stronger on the interface side. And so he's basically giving an argument that, an argument that you should focus at the database and kind of go database first as you're viewing things instead of getting too fancy with the interfaces. And even if you are using an interface, just use a grid view and kind of just do things. His argument was if you're thinking interface first, sometimes you have to do things at the data layer to make your interface work. But his argument is make sure your data structure is correct and then deal with the ramifications from there. Thoughts on different approaches?
I don't know if I have a fully formulated response, but I think my inclination is more almost the opposite, because Airtable is not the best database. In fact, if you just look at it as a database product alone, taking just the grid view, no other views at all, it's way behind so many other different platforms because you have so many different limits in terms of the number of fields you could use, the number of records you can have, the number of field types. There's no JSON field type, although most of the other SQL-based databases that I can find have at least some contingencies for that. Airtable's not really a database product. It's more like it wraps together a backend as a service as well as a user interface on top of it. And then on top of that, they have Interface Designer, which is basically an app builder, and they have an automations layer. I think as a whole, that really is their strength, which is why they keep pushing the connected apps platform marketing pitch, because really that's what it is. A lot of their competitors do 2 of the 3 things Airtable does better, but they don't do the third thing at all.
Yeah, that's a fair take.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, we'll wrap up there with the round the bases. I will say on this note, there is likely an announcement coming from Airtable that might actually probably be counterintuitive to Julian. It probably goes against what Julian is preaching here. So we should see something maybe later today. We'll talk about it next week, but it does kind of touch on this vein. So little teaser there of Airtable news coming. All right, let's talk about backups. Make sure ontoair.com is your place to go for your backup needs. It will help you follow best practices with your data and make sure that you have your data stored outside of Airtable. We support Google Drive, Box, and Dropbox to back up all of your data and your attachments, and coming very soon, your schema for your base schema fields and including formula fields that's now available. So that is coming very soon, and lots of new features we're working on for backups. So stay tuned for that. But check us out at ontoair.com and sign up. You can use the code BuiltOnAir to get a discount to backups. All right, we're now going to learn about proposal generation with Jen. Share your screen. There you go.
Awesome. So I built something similar for marketing clients where we, build brief generators. So we basically get information into Airtable, and then it will generate a Google Slides brief so they can start working on briefs. But I actually came up with a solution about a week ago because I was finding out that we needed a lot of proposals written very quickly. So it was also helpful to kind of, as you're talking to clients and on sales calls, making sure that you're gathering the right information so that you can quote effectively. So what I did was I created a fill out form, which we use to kind of capture the information for a proposal. And we started using fill out forms first because you can add more information into Airtable. Like when you have other information, it'll let you add questions and so forth, but it integrates directly with Airtable, so there's no lag time. We don't have to use like third-party services. And like you can see here, we added an extra field or another option, and it creates that new option as a drop-down. So it's kind of cool. But basically, the reason why we have this form is because we want to generate a proposal programmatically from details in Airtable, but we want to make sure that we use what I call an interface, which is not the same as Airtable interfaces, to make sure we capture the information in a way that makes sense and that it's organized. So we use forms generally for clients and just internally a lot, just to make sure they're not missing information. So this is a fill out form that we set up, and it's nice because it tells you when you mess up, and you get a little confetti, which is great. And then you'll see it come into our Airtable interface. So what we do here is that we go in the interface, we can see all the information needed for the proposal, and then start writing the proposal. And marketing team, lots of people, cool stuff. And then we pick up the client logo, and I grabbed some logos this morning. And then I haven't been able to get the accent color, do what I wanted to do. But basically what we're trying to do is as much as possible from the Airtable interfaces, as opposed to doing it like going into Google Slides, duplicating a slide, filling in the information. But let's see, I probably didn't pick the right images. Doing this too fast. And so like here's some stuff here. And then what we can do too is we use the new AI feature in Enterprise to generate some basic information. Like it takes this field right here and it gives me a lot of verbiage so I can review it, copy it into the description. I'm like, oh, this is super long, so I'm going to cut it down. And it says stuff I don't want. So this is what's actually going to show up on the slides. Then I trigger an automation, and I fixed it today so it actually shows me the Google Slide link when I'm done. But we have an integration in Make. We trigger a webhook off of that button in Airtable, which is the automation. And then we use Make to go back into Airtable and load all the values from that record. And then it creates a presentation. It adds the images to the slides, and then it returns the URL to Airtable. And you can see here that it doesn't like me, but it basically takes my, I'll go into Google Drive because this is being annoying. Give me 1 second. But basically what's nice about this is though, even though the images aren't exactly perfect, it fills in the information for us so that we can just make adjustments and then move on. So like we can fill this into the placeholder and stuff like that. So, and then we can just take out slides that don't make sense for that particular proposal. So it's still like a work in progress, but it just saves a lot of just the generic time, and it also sticks that AI generated blurb on the page for us. So it's just trying to be more efficient with the time. And also the biggest value that we've seen so far is that we can really look at requests and proposals and make sure that we are capturing all the information and we know how to respond to a request very quickly. So something that we just tried out.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So after Make creates it, and then it saves the link to it back in Airtable.
Yeah, it does. And I just fixed that this morning, and I think I just need to add some kind of criteria to it. So like if, the webhook gets triggered, I just go back into Airtable, and then it copies that template. It puts in, because we have these variables, let me get my template. It has these curly cube bracket placeholders. So all of those placeholders become values that you can fill in.
Yeah.
And so let me go in and say, okay, now to this proposal, replace that logo tag with the client logo here, which is the Airtable attachment URL. And so I can't figure out how to get it the right color, like to fill the placeholder, but I'm getting there. I'm working on it. But this is just, it's helpful for me, at least getting the words on the page and getting stuff in order without having to go in and do copies and pastes and so forth. It just at least puts the right information on the right page.
So you basically did like a mail merge, but with Google Slides. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a client a couple of years ago who needed like a brief created, and they were using PowerPoint. And we're like, well, can you go to Google Slides? And they're like, yeah. So I'm like, okay, we can use Zapier to do it. Now I've just been using Make more often, but it's still pretty cool because you can upload images and so forth. But it's nice because it's a mail merge, but it's a fast mail merge that you still have to edit, but it's not as time consuming.
There was this really cool tool that also did this called BuiltOnAir, but it unfortunately went away.
Since that tool went away, I had to figure out how to trigger it myself. And like I started using it with documents, and it works. Like we were using like the before I was like, well, I could just do this in the interface. We were using document to like get like the proposal into a page and stuff like that. The problem is sometimes we need to make edits. Like it's like Page Designer. You still have to make a little bit of edits and so forth. So having it in an editable process like the Google Slides is really helpful. And I think nowadays just putting it in a deck, people like to communicate with decks. So there's a deck.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Very useful. That's a pretty common use case of Airtable, using it for proposals, legal contracts. Yeah, because you can kind of do similar with Google Docs, and so we use that approach quite often.
Yeah, and the Airtable automation for Google Docs is okay, but it's kind of inflexible. So I find the mail merge aspect also allows you to better format.
Yeah.
Similar. All right, let's move on. Interfaces with Camille. Share your screen. There you go.
Well, here we are again, back in July. So, it's been a couple of months, but in July, Airtable updated the detail pages for Interface Designer and added a bunch of stuff and took a bunch of stuff away. And I wrote quite a lot about what they were like, and I continue to write a lot and more and more and more and more, basically. And it keeps going, of just stuff that I noticed and stuff that I hope that they improved. And they have made some adjustments, I think October 17th or so. So here's the same detail page that I used for that, just extreme detailed response. And I'm just going to go over some of the things that are different. Now I'm comparing the July detail pages to October detail pages, not to the legacy layout. We all know what the legacy layouts are like. So one of my frustrations with this particular layout, you can see I have these 3 similarly designed fields, and the July detail pages were very rigid in terms of for full page layouts, it was 4 columns across. For 3 page, for the side panel layouts, it was 3 across, and you couldn't control if I wanted a line break, if I wanted all of these to align. I didn't have that option. Well, now I do. I just sort of can drag and drop, and that's great. And then that's the first thing. The second thing is that it was difficult to add items between each other. Again, it was like one long list of records that arranged itself into a series of rows. Now you can have like control over if I want to put this record in between or this field in between, I can. And if I want to get rid of it, I just click on it and hit delete. And you can see the columns are automatically adjusting. Technically, this should be 2 across. I'm unsure what its deal is, why it wasn't auto adjusting, but if I rebuild that row, it will probably, yeah, you can see it's now stretching full across, and it will divide itself until it gets to its maximum of 4 things the more I go. So you can see I now have 4 things across. They've all adjusted their width, and I can't add any more next to it. If I start taking things away, this row will adjust itself, but these remain the same. So that's an improvement. You can now have within a group different amounts of columns in a different row. The other thing, these used to be called sections. They're now called groups. You can see the default title was my first section. It's now a group. That's very minor. Something that's also somewhat minor but appreciated, you can now apply a background color to the group. When I say a background color, I mean a single background color. It's light gray. You can't do any other color. So, I mean, why? I don't know, but hey, now you can make this gray. So that is helpful for breaking up these pages, but it is, again, I find it strange that you can't do the light versions of the other colors. But they built it in, the functionality, so maybe one day they'll add in the other colors. Who knows? I'm going to turn that off. What you can also do, if I were to click on any individual field, you can now have helper text. What's nice about the helper text is that it's rich text. So I can have like a bulleted list here that says stuff, more stuff. And that's useful if you have to explain what your fields do. My preference for helper text a lot of the time is to put it next to the field rather than between the title and the field content. But I can put this here, which is helpful. Again, it's not quite there, but it is a considerable improvement, especially because it's rich text. So, we're able to add like a direct link to something related to that field and that field alone. I'm going to turn that off because I don't need it. The other thing, with July detail pages, you could have linked records appear as pills and cards, but you could also have them as any of the other Airtable view types other than Gantt, because Gantts don't exist in Interface Designer. One of my major complaints is that it's so narrow. For regular groups, you can't have it expand across the full width, but for linked record groups, you can. So it's just this toggle, show us full width, and it does what you expect it to. It becomes full width. I find it strange that I could do it for that, but not the regular field groups. But I don't make the rules. I'm just reporting what's new. Also, in the July detail pages, Regular sections, now known as groups, could have descriptions. Again, those are rich text enabled, but linked record groups could not. Now they can. So if I preview with no description included, it's going to get rid of that space automatically. But if I start adding one here, it will appear. So that's nice. Now you can describe what your linked records are. And again, once more with feeling, they allow for rich text. That's nice. Before I forget, another one of my complaints is that in the July detail pages, you could only show one field once on the page. Sometimes what I like to do is have a read-only version of a field up at the top and an editable version at the bottom after I've explained very thoroughly what you're supposed to do with that field. If you want to show a field more than once, you can duplicate it. And now I have two versions of the same field. So yay, that's a.
And they're both can be editable.
This is a formula, so I'm going to duplicate one that's not a formula. This is a regular text field. If I make that one view only, right? This is view only, but this one is editable. So that felt like a minor complaint for me, but I'm very glad that it's here because I don't need it so much with these types of fields. What I really needed it for was for linked records, because sometimes I wanted to show it as a gallery and sometimes I wanted to show it as a as a grid underneath. And you can duplicate this whole section again. So the duplicated one doesn't come in as full width, but you'll notice that it does keep the description that I typed in. Is there any other major adjustment that I have forgotten? I don't know if there's a major change since the July version. Again, you can keep the useful features of having end user control over the view that they're given, and as well as like drop down filters. You could also use their tab filters. That's very useful. But I think those are like the main changes that I noticed in this adjustment. I think this is a better system than the July system, just because you can have that control of this row in this group should have two columns, or maybe it only needs one column and it spans the whole way across. It's more evident if I make that extra large. That's very useful. And these down here, I'm 1 and 4. Now I have that control. In legacy layouts, the maximum you could put next to each other, and I think it was 8. You're cut down to 4. So there's a lot more spacing in the new layouts versus legacy layouts, but it gives you like a piece of the flexibility that you used to have. And if you need things like these filters or being able to like search and all of that on your linked records, now it might be the case that the newer detail page layouts are better suited for your use case than the legacy. It now really depends. Before it wasn't so much a toss-up. Now I think it's kind of a toss-up. It depends on like, yes, I need my helper text to be next to the field, or yes, I need more than 4 things next to each other, or I need this group to span the full width, or I need some color other than gray. If any of those are critical for your layout, and sometimes they might be, then the newer detail pages still aren't quite there. But if none of those are super critical, then you might want to take a look at them again.
Awesome.
Very good. Very helpful. Keep us up to date on all the interface changes.
I sure will.
Yeah. I wonder, that's one thing, like the full width. And in talking to Airtable, obviously mobile was the main driver to move to kind of this approach. Mm-hmm. But there's still times if you're web heavy that you want the 8 columns or a full width. I wonder if they'll address that.
Well, one thing that isn't quite addressed yet, you can make grids full width, but you can't make them any taller. This is the height. And if you change the row height to its smallest, which is short, the maximum number of records that you can have visible at a time is 10, I think. It might be 11. That's not a lot of records. Why? Airtable, please. Yeah. I think that's my outstanding, most major complaint. I can deal with the buttons being somewhere else on the page than I want them to be, as long as I could put them there. I can't deal with only showing roughly 10 or 11 records at a time. I love that I can make it full screen, but I also need that vertical height. This really only affects the grid view. List views will auto adjust their height for you. I'll just demonstrate. It knows how tall the list is supposed to be. Obviously, with gallery, you have control over how many rows there are on a page. So it really is it's the grid view, and I misspoke. Actually, Kanban kind of has this problem as well, that you don't have control over how tall it is. I think you should be able to control how tall it is. I have a lot of linked records.
I think they really try to force the list view, and the list view doesn't really solve, because the grid view has the ability to do statistical analysis, whereas the list view doesn't.
I would agree. The very use case that I'm building for has a lot of numbers in it, and we want to be able to see the sum of those numbers across whatever grouping we're using. And list view looks nice, but it doesn't let me do that, and that's kind of a deal breaker. So I'll use a list view where I can, but if I need, this thing, my only option is the grid view. So
yeah, absolutely. I wish you could choose kind of like you can on the gallery, it automatically paginates. I wish you could do that with any of the views, show all of the records, because sometimes if you have a lot of records, you don't want them all showing because it takes up, you don't want somebody to have to scroll and scroll and scroll. So if you could just say show 10 at a time and have a little page switcher, that would be amazing too. But
I would agree. I think you could use it in conjunction, similar to the row height thing, where I don't need pixel control necessarily, or to use a grid system. If you give me just these 4 options, if this height that I'm showing on my screen right now is short, and then I have the option to make it a little bit taller, or a little bit taller, and a little bit taller, that would also work. Or to go straight into just show me a maximum of 50 records, and then it just paginates. I would be fine with that too. But this right here is not enough. But that's really hyper focused on that one limitation that's been there since July. It's still there. This is better. Yeah. Still not there.
Yeah. I will say I love that they put the appearance tab on the same, they merged it into just the one detail thing.
Yes.
Yeah. That, because I'm constantly changing, if you're on a text field or a single select, I like to make those large a lot of the time. And now you can all on the one screen, which is saving lots of clicks for me.
Yeah. Because you already have to click into the item itself, right? You don't want to do another click up here to the appearance tab. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Camille, for going through that. And I'm sure we will continue to keep you updated on as they improve interfaces. Definitely an area where lots of resources are being put into. All right, quick shout out. Join our community, builtonair.com/join. We'll get you in particular to our Slack community of thousands of Airtable fans and users, and talking every day, all day about Airtable and how to use it in your business, and ask for help and share cool things that you're working on. So join us at builtonair.com. Final episode, we're going to talk about Array Slice. Array Slice is the newest formula function. It came out a few months ago. And so, as you know, if you create a formula field, then you have different functions in here, and there's a few. These have been here for a long time: array join, array unique, array compact, and array flatten. And then they added array slice. And if we click on that, so it returns a subset of the array from the start index number, starting from 1. So it's 1 based instead of 0. If you're a developer, you may be familiar with starting at 0. These make it start at 1. And then optionally specify an end index to stop. So that's the index of the last element that you want. And you can also use negative numbers to count from the end to get to where you want to be. So if you want just the last one element in an array, you can use -1. If you want the last 2. And we've got Bill French listening in, sharing with us. And can you use array slice as a form of split? Let's find out. Let's see what happens there. So basically this works. We're going to go through a couple of scenarios to see when it works and when it doesn't. But the main use case is using this with lookup fields, where you are looking up into a linked record that then returns an array. So a lookup will return an array. An array is basically a set of items. So if you have a lookup field that's looking into a linked record that can be one or more elements, and so this will extract from that array the elements that you want. So maybe you just want one item in there, or maybe you want multiple. We'll do a test to see what's going on there. So this one right here, this array, this is looking at a link, which is, let me double check, make sure my link is, yeah, so here's my link. So this is linking to another table, and it allows for multiple. So I've got 2 up here and I've got 1 here. And so, so this one is using a -1. So that's getting the last element in the array, and it's only getting 1 because I only have 1 item. And if you're using a negative, then you probably wouldn't. Let's see if this works. So basically I want to get from the second to last item, and I want it to end at the last item. I wonder if that will work. Let's test this out. I think I broke it. I just crashed Airtable.
The circle of death.
There we go. Okay, so let me get one more in here. Okay, so we've got Facebook results. So it did not work because it brought in all 4 of them. So that one didn't work. If I change it to just -1, that should just return a single one. And that does not work either.
That feels like a bug though, right?
So I think it's because, so it doesn't work on the link itself. So this is the actual link. Oh yeah, this is why I built it. I did this base because I was going to show it last week and I've forgotten my use cases. But so this is trying to extract from the link itself, and it doesn't seem to work directly on there. But if I add a lookup field on that link and I just get the name, then if I did it on there, that does work. So it doesn't like the link itself. You have to create a lookup on that link. So here it's pulling in the last item. So my last item is results summer travel spotlight. And that's what I'm getting here. So if I do it on here, if I were to do a -2, then it'll get the second to last one. And it pulls in from the second to last to the end. So if you don't put in that last parameter, it's going to get all the elements to the end. And so if we change that last one, I do -2 and I want it to, let's say end, well, let's do -3 and end on -1. Actually, I probably want to end on -2. See if that works. Okay, that does work. Okay, so you can play with the negatives, but the main thing is if you do it on the actual link, it doesn't give you that index of the links. You got to create a lookup on there. And so you can do things like, let's go back to, so if we want to start on the first one and end on the second one, you could do 1, 2, and that will give you the first and the up to the second. So some of these only have 1, so it's only returning the first one. Let's look at this guy. Yeah, this is just looking at the second one. So let's answer Bill's question. Let's see if we can slice a text field. So in some programming languages, it can treat, like in JavaScript, you can treat a string as if it was an array and kind of split that string where you have one element for each character. Let's see what happens if we try to slice the text. We have the name, and let's just get the second to fourth. So we'll just get a couple in between, and it does not work. So you can't slice it. So is there a way to convert the name into an array that might help? We did array join. No. Is there a string to array function? There isn't, is there?
I don't think so.
Array. No, just fun.
Because array join goes to a string, puts an array in.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is no split. So that's a very common. Bill French has been asking for it from day one that it needs to be there. And what's odd is they clearly, some developer said we need an array slice in here and added it. That's probably, if I feel like this is like the only new function that's been added in a long time. So I don't think they have a dedicated team building functions because they don't come out very often, but array split would definitely be one to add.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is attachments. It does not like attachments. I was hoping to extract something from the attachment. It converts the attachments to strings. And so it puts like the name and the URL in parentheses. And let's see, is this a lookup? Yeah, so this is a lookup and it didn't give me just one. So it converted the whole thing into there. I was hoping it would just return 1, but it doesn't like attachments from my testing. So attachments are tricky. So that is array slice. Any other experience using array slice?
I haven't had to use it yet.
Yeah. So you can use that. Same, Jen?
Yeah, I'm sure I had some use case for it a year ago, but we solved it with a formula for right now.
Very good. We're over time, so we'll end there. But Jen, tell people where they can find you. You renamed, right? So
yeah, it's redconsulting.io.
What is it?
You can Red Consulting.
Redconsulting.io. There you go. So no longer Grow with Jen.
It's not, unfortunately. But if you look for Grow with Jen, you could still find it because I haven't done that good of a scrubbing.
No worries. Glad to have you back, and we'll have you
Thank
on
you.
again. And that's our show for today. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you all.